I didn't plan on shutting down a multi-million-dollar construction project. Honestly, I just wanted my grass back. But the thing about people, especially developers with money and tight deadlines, is they start to believe the rules don't apply to them. And if you let that slide even once, they'll take a mile. So here's what happened. I live on a quiet street just outside the city. Nothing fancy, just one of those neighborhoods where people still wave when they drive by, where the loudest thing you'll hear most days is a lawn mower or someone's dog barking at nothing. My place is modest, single-story, clean yard, and on the right side, I've got this wide strip of land, my side lot. I've always kept it empty. No shed, no fence, just open space. I liked it that way, felt like breathing room. For years, the property next door was basically forgotten. Dry dirt, weeds, the occasional trash blowing through. Nobody cared about it. Then one year, that changed. A company called Redwood Urban Development bought it. And I swear, the transformation started overnight. First it was survey crews, guys with neon vests and tripods, measuring everything like they were mapping out a new planet. Then came the trucks, big ones, early morning deliveries that rattled windows before sunrise. Within a week, they had a temporary office set up, trailers, signage, permits posted like they were planting a flag. Turns out, they were building a cluster of modern rental units. Tight spacing, clean design, the kind of place that looks good in a brochure but feels like a shoebox in real life. At first, I didn't care. Construction happens. You deal with it. Noise, dust, traffic, it's temporary. Or at least, it's supposed to be. One evening, I got home a little later than usual. Sun was dipping, that orange light hitting everything just right. I pulled into my driveway, stepped out, and that's when I noticed it. Stacks of lumber. Not just a few pieces, full bundles, strapped tight, neatly arranged, sitting right along the edge of my side lot. At first, I thought, okay, probably a mistake. Maybe the driver dropped it a few feet off. No big deal. They'll move it tomorrow. Yeah, that didn't happen. Next morning, I step outside with my coffee, and now there's more. Steel beams, pallets of bricks, rolls of insulation wrapped in plastic like oversized burritos. And here's the thing, they weren't even trying to hide it. Forklifts were driving back and forth across my land like it was part of their job site. That's when it hit me. They weren't storing materials near my property. They were storing them on it. So I walked over. Calm. Not looking for a fight. I found one of the guys unloading a truck and asked, "Hey, who's in charge here?" He pointed me toward a guy in a white hard hat, clipboard, radio, the whole supervisor vibe. I walked up, introduced myself, and said, "Hey, I think some of your materials are on my property." He barely looked at me, just glanced over his shoulder and said, "Yeah, it's temporary. We're still setting up our storage zone." Temporary. That word, people love hiding behind it. I said, "I get that, but this is my land. That stuff needs to be moved." He finally turned, looked around like he was trying to figure out what I was talking about, then shrugged and said, "The boundary line isn't exact. We're within reasonable range." That's when I knew exactly what kind of situation this was. Not a mistake. A calculation. Because see, when someone tells you your property line isn't exact, what they're really saying is they're hoping you don't know where it is. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. I just nodded and said, "All right." Then I went inside. That night, I pulled out my property survey documents, the ones most people never even look at after closing day. Clean lines, precise measurements, stamped and certified. And guess what? That boundary. It was exact, down to the inch. And those stacks of lumber? They weren't close. They were several feet inside my land. Every single pallet they dropped, every forklift track pressed into my soil. That wasn't a gray area. That was trespassing. So the next morning, I did something simple. I went out and placed bright orange boundary markers right along the property line. Not vague, not subtle, clear enough that even someone pretending not to notice couldn't ignore it. And you know what they did? They shifted the stacks, maybe a foot. That's it. Didn't remove them. Didn't apologize. Just adjusted enough to say, "See, we moved it." Then more deliveries came. More materials. More forklifts cutting across my land like it was public space. And at that point, I realized something. They weren't going to stop. Not because they didn't understand, but because they thought I wouldn't do anything about it. And that's the moment everything changed. Because I'm the kind of person who doesn't react fast. But when I do, I make sure it counts. So I started documenting. Every morning, photos. Every evening, videos. Forklifts driving across my property. Workers stacking materials over the line. Tire tracks cutting through grass that used to be perfectly level. No confrontation. No yelling. Just evidence. Because if they wanted to treat my land like it didn't belong to anyone, I was going to remind them exactly who it belonged to. And more importantly, what it was going to cost them. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people mess up, and honestly, it's why situations like this keep happening in the first place. According to standard procedure, any construction project, especially residential development, has to follow a very strict site logistics plan. That includes where materials are stored, how equipment moves, and most importantly, staying within the legally approved boundaries. Those plans aren't suggestions, they're part of the permit approval. Violate them, and you're not just bending rules, you're risking enforcement action. From a legal perspective, what they were doing wasn't just temporary inconvenience. It was textbook trespassing. And here's the key detail most homeowners overlook. You don't need dramatic damage for it to matter. The moment someone uses your land without permission, especially for commercial gain, that's liability, plain and simple. Add heavy equipment, soil compaction, and repeated access. Now you're stacking violations. But here's where it gets interesting. This is a psychological trap developers fall into all the time. They operate on momentum, tight schedules, multiple crews, constant deliveries. And when something small like a property line gets in the way, they don't stop the machine, they just push through it. Quietly, hoping no one slows them down. Because stopping, even for a day, costs money. Big money. So they test you. They start small. A few materials. A temporary excuse. A vague comment about boundaries not being clear. And if you hesitate, if you second-guess yourself, they take that as permission. Not legally, but psychologically. And once that line is crossed, it only goes one direction. Further, the lesson here is situations like this aren't really about land. They're about leverage. And the moment I realized that, I stopped thinking like a neighbor and started thinking like a problem they couldn't ignore. So once I understood what was really going on, I stopped treating it like a neighborly disagreement and started treating it like a case I was building. Every photo, every video, every tire track pressed into my soil, it wasn't just documentation anymore. It was leverage. And I took my time with it. Didn't rush. Didn't tip them off. Because the worst thing you can do in a situation like this is show your hand too early. A few days later, I drove down to the city permit office. Now, if you've never been inside one of those places, let me paint the picture. Fluorescent lights, stacks of paperwork, people behind counters who've seen every kind of dispute you can imagine. It's not dramatic, but it's where decisions get real. I walked up, gave them the project address, and asked to review the approved site plans. Took a little while, but eventually they pulled it up. And there it was. Black and white. The construction boundary, clearly marked. Fencing lines. Storage zones. Access routes. Everything mapped out like a blueprint for how the project was supposed to function. And right there in the notes, clear as day, all material storage must remain within designated, fenced construction limits. Unauthorized use of adjacent property may result in enforcement action, including stop work orders. I actually leaned back a little when I read that, because at that point, it wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. They weren't bending rules. They were breaking approved conditions. So I filed a formal complaint. No emotion, no exaggeration, just facts, dates, photos, video clips, a copy of my property survey, and a simple explanation: materials stored beyond boundary, repeated equipment access, visible damage to private land. That was it. And then, I waited. A few days went by, nothing changed on site. Same trucks, same noise, same quiet assumption that everything was fine. Until it wasn't. Late morning, maybe around 10:30, I saw two vehicles pull up near the site entrance. Not construction trucks, city vehicles. Two inspectors stepped out. Clipboards, measuring wheels, the whole thing. And suddenly, the energy shifted. You could feel it. Supervisors started walking faster. Radios lit up. Workers slowed down, watching from a distance. I stayed on my porch. Didn't say a word. Just watched. They started at the edge of the construction zone, measuring, checking markers, comparing everything to the approved plans. Then they moved closer, right up to where those stacks of lumber were sitting. One of them stopped, looked down at the ground, Then over at the boundary markers I had placed. Said something to the other guy. They measured again. And again. Took photos. Wrote notes. Then they walked further along, checking the steel beams, the pallets, the forklift tracks carved into my soil. That part, you couldn't ignore even if you tried. The ground was compacted, uneven, tire marks cutting across what used to be clean grass. This wasn't accidental anymore. This was repeated use. After about 30 minutes, they called over the site supervisor, the same guy who told me the boundary wasn't exact. I couldn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. Body language says a lot. He wasn't relaxed anymore. Arms crossed, then uncrossed. Hands on hips. That slight nod people do when they know they've been caught, but are still trying to talk their way out of it. Didn't work. About an hour later, everything stopped. And I mean everything. Forklifts shut down. Deliveries paused. Workers just standing around. Then the notice went up. A bright, official document posted right near the entrance. Stop work order. No framing. No structural assembly. No further material deliveries. The entire build frozen. And here's the thing people don't realize. When a project like that stops, it's not just inconvenient. It's expensive. Crews still need to be paid. Equipment rentals don't pause. Delivery schedules get thrown off. Investors start asking questions. Every hour costs money. That evening, just before sunset, there was a knock on my door. I already knew who it was. Opened it up, and there he stood. Not the supervisor this time. Higher up. Project coordinator type. Clean shirt, no dust on his boots. He gave me that tight, professional smile and said, "Hey, I think we got off on the wrong foot." Of course we did. He started explaining how the situation got out of hand, how they were under pressure, how the storage area wasn't ready yet. Same story, just packaged better. Then he got to the point. "We'll clear everything off your property immediately," he said. "We just need this resolved so we can keep moving." And that's where most people would fold. Because on the surface, it sounds reasonable, right? They made a mistake. They'll fix it. Everyone moves on. But I didn't say yes. I just looked at him for a second, then glanced past him toward my side lot. The grass was crushed flat, soil compacted, bits of debris scattered around, plastic wrap, wood splinters, dust. And I said, "Clearing it isn't enough." That smile faded, just a little. I kept going. "You didn't just store materials here. You used the land. Repeatedly. That ground's damaged." He started to respond, but I cut in, calm, steady. "I want full restoration. Fresh topsoil, new grass, cleanup of all debris. And I want a barrier along the property line so this doesn't happen again." Now he hesitated. Because this wasn't part of their quick fix plan. This was going to cost them time. More money. And right behind him, you could see it. The construction site, quiet, waiting. Crews with nothing to do. A project stuck in place because it didn't have the materials it needed to move forward. That was the leverage. And he knew it. He looked back at the site, then back at me. And after a few seconds, he said, "All right." No argument. No negotiation. Just, "All right." 2 days later, the trucks came back. But this time, they weren't unloading. They were taking everything away. One by one, the stacks disappeared. Lumber, steel, bricks, all of it cleared off my land. Then came the cleanup crew. Workers with shovels and equipment, leveling out the soil, breaking up the compacted areas, hauling away debris. Fresh topsoil was spread across the damaged sections, smoothed out like nothing had ever been there. A few days after that, grass seed, watering, care, and along the property line, a temporary fence went up. Clear boundary. No confusion. Inspectors returned not long after. Walked the area again. Checked the conditions. Compared everything to the original complaint. And this time, there was nothing to flag. Everything was back within compliance. So they lifted the stop work order. Just like that, the project came back to life. Trucks returned. Crews got moving again. The machine started back up. But differently. Because now, they knew exactly where the line was. And more importantly, they knew I wasn't someone they could ignore. Fast forward a few months, the rental units are nearly finished. Clean lines, fresh paint, people already touring the place like none of this ever happened. And my side lot looks exactly like it did before. Open, clean, untouched. Like the whole thing never happened. Except it did. And I guarantee you, they won't make that mistake again. So yeah, on the surface, this story looks simple. Guy protects his land, developer messes up, everything gets fixed. Clean ending, right? But if you look a little closer, this wasn't really about dirt or grass or even property lines. It was about something a lot more common and a lot more uncomfortable. It was about how far people will go when they think no one's paying attention. Because here's the truth, nothing they did was accidental. Not the first stack of lumber. Not the forklifts driving across my lot. Not even that line about the boundary being not exact. That was strategy. Maybe not a written one, but definitely a practiced one. Push a little. See if anyone reacts. If not, push more. And that kind of thinking doesn't just live in construction sites. It shows up everywhere. Workplaces, neighborhoods, even relationships. People test limits. Quietly, casually. And if you don't respond, they rewrite the rules in their favor. The lesson here is, boundaries don't mean anything unless they're enforced. And I don't mean aggressively. I don't mean yelling or making a scene. I mean clearly, consistently, with just enough pressure that ignoring you becomes more expensive than respecting you. Because that's what this really came down to: cost. Not emotional cost. Financial cost. The moment that stop work order went up, the entire equation changed. Suddenly, my small piece of land wasn't small anymore. It was the reason a whole project couldn't move forward. That's leverage. And most people don't realize they have it until it's too late. Now, let's talk about the other side of this for a second. Because I know what some people are thinking. Why not just let it go? It's temporary. They didn't mean harm. And sure, maybe that sounds reasonable. But here's the problem with that mindset. When you normalize small violations, you invite bigger ones. Today it's materials. Tomorrow it's access. Next week it's permanent use. And suddenly, something that was never yours to give away is gone. Not because someone took it by force, but because they took it by assumption. And that's a dangerous habit to reward. From a legal perspective, situations like this are exactly why property rights exist in the first place. Not to create conflict, but to prevent it. Clear boundaries, documented ownership, enforceable rules. They're not there to make life harder. They're there so people don't have to argue about what belongs to who. But laws only work when someone is willing to use them. And that's where a lot of people hesitate. They don't want to be that neighbor. They don't want to escalate things. They don't want to deal with the hassle. So they tolerate. They wait. They hope it resolves itself. And sometimes it does. But most of the time, it doesn't. Because again, this is a psychological trap. The other side isn't waiting for clarity. They're watching for resistance. And if they don't see any, they keep going. That's why documentation mattered. That's why I didn't argue on day one. That's why I let them keep doing what they were doing, just long enough to prove a pattern. Because one mistake can be explained away. But repeated behavior? That's evidence. And once you have that, you're not just complaining anymore. You're presenting a case. And that changes everything. Now here's the part one think matters most. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was more aggressive. I won because I was patient and precise. I understood the system better than they expected me to. And I used it, not to punish them, but to correct the situation. And that's an important distinction. Because if you go into something like this driven by anger, you lose focus. You react instead of plan. You escalate instead of control. But if you stay calm, if you understand the rules, you don't have to fight hard. You just have to apply pressure in the right place. And eventually, things move. So yeah, my land looks exactly the same as it did before. But I see it differently now. It's not just empty space. It's a reminder that even something quiet, overlooked, and not a big deal can become very important the moment someone tries to take advantage of it. And maybe the bigger question here is, what would you have done? Would you have ignored it? Spoken up sooner? Handled it differently? Because situations like this, they're not rare. They just don't always get pushed this far. So I'm curious, where do you draw the line when someone steps over yours?